Welcome to the Build Your Legal Business podcast, the place for lawyers who want to scale without burning out. I am Hannah Becco, your self-employed lawyer coach, by your side as you create the practice you dream of, reduce your working hours, and change the fee earner mindset to successful lawyerpreneur. Enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Build Your Legal Business podcast. And today I'm really excited because it's taken us a long time to arrange this interview to introduce you to the lovely Ange De Lumiere. Now, Ange she introduces herself as a spiritual lawyer, a business and spiritual mentor to ambitious entrepreneurs. And as I know we have many lawyerpreneurs who listen to this podcast, I think this will be a really interesting one for you. So Ange, do tell us more about what you do, and because I've heard it from you before, a little bit about your backstory and your history, because you were a lawyer once upon a time before this work. So do tell us a little bit about that as well.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. It's a real honor. For those of people who haven't picked up on my accent yet, I'm French. I'm from Paris, and I had a thriving career as an international business lawyer for about 15 years, traveling the world. It was in the telecom industry and mostly centered around mergers and acquisition. I enjoyed my job thoroughly. It was very exciting, very stimulating. However, it was not very compatible with being a single mum, which I became in 2001. And so I had to... It's a bit of a complicated story because by then I had moved to the UK, so I wasn't actually qualified to practice law in the UK. I still live in the UK, by the way. So I had to pretty much completely reinvent myself, which wasn't without growing pains. And I started off by training as a clinical hypnotherapist because it's something that I had always been fascinated about, mostly because I was interested in reincarnation as a teenager. And I knew that with clinical hypnotherapy, you could actually regress into past lives. And that's not actually something I ended up doing, but I'm so glad I trained in clinical hypnotherapy because it helped me to understand the mind at a level that has helped me with every single aspect of my life. And I can now see, lawyers' minds and their intellect and their brain are one of their biggest assets, aren't they? So I can now see how crucial this information is for lawyers, first in their, thinking process, but also in their mindset. And then I took it a bit further because I'm quite a curious person. I like to experiment with things. And I was fascinated by intuition. So I started to explore that area as well, which clinical hypnotherapy helped me to understand to a certain degree as well. Because the intuition is also linked to creativity, innovation, and originality. And I had always been sort of cornered as a bit of an eccentric. My boss has used that actually in my different roles by putting me on jobs that had never been done before. So at the early stages, I started off in one of the Magic Circle law firms in Paris, and then I branched into being an in-house lawyer. And I was put on the very first contract that was put together. I don't even know how to explain it, but it was, up to then, the Ministry of Telecom would give you a landline if you needed one for your business. And that was it. You were treated the same almost as another individual, except for the capacity and everything else. But they wanted to start creating bespoke contracts for their business customers, and so I was put on that to start putting proper contracts in place, really negotiating networks that would support the privacy of the companies, so they would have landlines that would not be public or on another kind of network, also all that sort of thing, adding on satellite, submarine cable communication and what have not. It was really fun.
Typical lawyer. Do you know, I have a lot of fun with a lease, and everyone is like, what are you talking about with a lease? And you're like that with those contracts. It's brilliant.
But funny enough, I started in property, commercial property at the law firm I worked at. And then I went into the telecom, and it was great fun. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, so from there, it's very interesting you say about getting involved in clinical hypnotherapy, because I often think about how, because people say to me, oh, you know, you're a chronically stressed lawyer, you turned it around, now you do all these exciting things. What was the first thing? And I always say, well, meditation was one of the first things for me that unlocked so much of what I do. But I'd forgotten that I first got involved in that a few years before, when I had my second son and we did hypnobirthing, because I'd had such a bad experience the first time around. I was determined it wasn't going to happen the second time around. So I really got myself into hypnobirthing. And now I look back, that was my first real experience of meditation, and of the ability that we have to influence our brain and our thinking, I suppose. I'm sure you'd put it far more technically than I can. But looking back, that was the first time. And you're so right. We lawyers do spend so much time in our heads. The ability to sort of master it in some way is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, it's our biggest asset. And also there's another thing that I realized with hindsight and just observing, you know, with the, I suppose, a critical eye. I don't mean in a negative, in a critical eye, is that good lawyers are known for knowing where to spot problems. So we're problem finders, but we actually only serve our clients best when we move from problem to solution. And yet training in hypnotherapy has enabled me to realize that if we're stuck in problem mode, we never find a solution. So knowing how to go from one to the other in a really fluid way can enhance our practice and make us more helpful to our clients as well.
Ooh, now I know you've mentioned this to me before, and it reminds me of a quote that I won't be able to put word for word, but it's along the lines of, and I know my coach has said this to me before, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. Yeah, I'm like, ooh, now even that takes a little while to think about. But so it's that similar, I think, to what you've just said. So is there, and I'm putting you on the spot here, is there actually something practical that our lawyer audience could do with that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll have to explain to you a little bit how the reptile brain works and how our creative thinking works, so that you see how you can get stuck in one or the other and how you can go from one to the other. So what happens is we have what people called a reptile brain, or it's a fear center. Technically or medically, it's called the amygdala, that governs both the hippocampus and the hypothalamus. And the hippocampus is where we clump together memory to make sense of them. And it actually creates beliefs. So whenever something happens to us, it's almost like you have two decisions to make in which direction you want to go. Either you go into fear or you go into creative mode or creative thinking. So if you encounter a problem, if you get into the fear mode, you'll be stuck in it, because you will go into all your negative beliefs, and it's going to drag in all sorts of baggage that you don't really want to look at. And this is the trick. Or the extra difficulty that I think lawyers have, because we are trained to see the worst in every possible situation. So it's almost like we're already sitting in that energy, right? Now, to be able to go from one to the other, you want to literally pluck yourself out. And one of the best ways to do that is to visualize, or to go for a walk, or to do something completely different, so that you put yourself into trance. Now, trance is not what people think it is. It's not like, you know, pretending you're a chicken on stage because the hypnotist guides you to act silly.
I can't see many of my lawyers going for that.
No, and I would never want to do that. But we go into trance, for example, when we watch TV, which is how, you know, marketers are able to influence us into buying products. We go into trance when we drive our car, when we have a shower, when we wash the dishes. And it doesn't need to be a state where you're not conscious of what you're doing. It's just that state of relaxation when you do something almost on autopilot. So I'm not saying that all your lawyers should take up running, but if it could be an added benefit. If you have a big problem you don't know how to solve, going for a run outdoors is the perfect way to find the solution, because it clears your mind. If that makes any sense.
Yes, it really does. In fact, it picks up on a training session I was doing last week about creativity. And we talked about exactly that. I said to people, when are you your most creative? And the ideas that came back were brushing your teeth, having a shower, going for a run. For me, it's driving my car, you know, being on my own, drive, loud music. That's my, as you say, it's when you, when we're sat at the desk doing the work, that's not when we're going to have our creative problem-solving ideas, as you say. It's when we create space. And one of the people at the training actually said this. She said, it's when I create the space for the ideas to come in.
Yeah. And the difficulty is that for most people, when they talk about this, they will want to push you towards meditation. And it's not for everyone. I don't do meditation very gracefully. And so I had to find other ways. And for me, it started actually in a really funny way. I took up mosaic, the art form, the media, back in the 90s, more as a hobby in the evening to kind of relax myself. And I didn't realize what was happening until I trained in clinical hypnotherapy, which is basically doing this art with these pieces of broken stuff that I put together almost like a puzzle, except I didn't have any instructions. It enabled me to almost bypass my mind and to quiet it to the point where I wasn't thinking about anything anymore. And that was so much more helpful for me. And some people find that in needlework, in knitting, in woodwork, whatever it is, something more, to do with your hands, because also it draws you away from the thinking process. And I think as lawyers, we're constantly bombarded with thoughts and thinking and reading and analyzing and criticizing and whatever it is that we do, drafting, but we don't give ourselves, our minds a break, and we need that space. I remember when I was a very busy mergers and acquisition lawyer, I literally had a picture of a beach next to my screen that I would, slowly turn my head, look at the beach for a few seconds, and then go back to my screen. And that alone enabled me sometimes to have some breakthroughs. So that's why I used to have a podcast called Have a Monday. I had an episode that was very popular that was called the 5-Minute Meditator, because you don't need a lot of time. It's more about that process of knowing how to switch your mind and how to get into a different headspace, really. That's what it is about.
Yes, it really is. And I say, I've saved deals before brushing my teeth. I'm brushing my teeth and this idea comes in. I'm like, oh, there's a £2 million deal. We could do it still if we do it this way. And then, of course, being a typical lawyer, I'm like, oh, how much do I charge for that? Because it's more than one unit, So I always say to clients now, make sure you're charging your time properly for even the ideas you have in the shower or running.
Yeah. And this is where we can slide in a little bit for the part of your audience that's more open-minded around intuition, because I'm a big fan of intuition in business. I actually wrote a book called The Intuitive Revolution in Business that can be found on my website of the same name. Sorry for the plug. I hope it's okay.
Oh, no, please. Yes.
And the thing is, intuition, creativity are very intimately linked. But when you were describing how you got your idea by brushing your teeth, I make the difference between thinking and intuition, because in the thinking process, you have what I call the thinking train, which means you have train A, B, C, D, E. It's a logical sequence of ideas that follow each other. If this, that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and then you come to a solution or not. Whereas with intuition, there is a gap between two trains where there's nothing happening, and there's something that pops in the middle. And I call that like a bubble of intuition, because you've created that space between your thoughts. And it is not a thought that you think. It's a thought that literally lands into your mind, or that pops up, whichever way you think that it comes from, whichever way, do you understand? And that is gold, because it allows you to find a solution that has not been found before. It's a sort of that you might not have thought about it because you didn't know about it, or because it had never been done before, like in the example at the start of this interview when I was telling you about all the contracts I had to create from scratch. So it's very good for lawyers, because it allows lawyers to come into this innovative space where they find these solutions that then they become cherished for by entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs don't like lawyers who find problems. They want lawyers who enable them to do what they want to do, obviously within limits. There's some boundaries. We're good on boundaries. We wouldn't want to go, to cross any of those boundaries. But within that, there's so much creativity in ways that might have never been done, but you can't get there through thinking.
Yeah. Do you know, I just couldn't nod more and agree with you more. And I think it's not just in solving the problems for the clients, which is very important in itself, as you say, because particularly, my audience with this podcast are the more entrepreneurial type lawyers who may be either running their own business now or it's something they want to do in the future. And generally speaking, the sorts of clients that they're going to be looking for and working with are looking for that sort of lawyer, the modern lawyer, the one who's thinking outside the box, just as you described. But it's not just that. When they are self-employed or they have their own business or whatever, it's all the other things they need to do, the marketing ideas, the who's my niche going to be, who am I going to work with, who's my ideal client. These are the things I love working with people on, because it's like, I'm sure for you it's probably similar. When you said about the gap in the train and the idea pops up, sometimes in the conversation that idea comes to me because I'm listening to them. They're telling me about what they've done before and what their experience is. And then there's like a big sign saying, this is their niche. This is who they need to work with. And to me, suddenly it's so obvious. And of course, that's who they should work with. And they're like, oh, of course, why did I not think of that? Of course, that's the obvious people I should be working with. So it's so much more than only solutions to clients' problems, isn't it? It's their business planning. It's their marketing. It's everything. Do you see that similarly?
Oh, absolutely. And I use this a lot in my marketing. Very often I will be drawn to write about something. I don't plan most of my content, because what I do is I ask myself, or I ask my intuition, whatever you want to call it, it's still me. What does my client need to hear right now? The client that's going to see this post, and then I just write it away. And I've had people contact me just because I selected a specific image that spoke to them that made no sense to me at the time. I remember very specifically having posted, and it wasn't lawyers, it was in a group of entrepreneurs, a big lion with it, roaring, and that caught the attention of a person who then contacted me because of that image. Sometimes it's a word. I also remember, and we were talking before we recorded this episode about client attraction. Intuition is super important in the attraction process, because it's almost like you get to feel what the client who's coming to you, who you don't know, what they need to hear, without knowing how you know it, if that makes any sense, because you allow for these images or ideas to pop into your mind. And it's very, very effective. And I'm going to give you one example that blew my mind, literally. And it was a client that I met as a prospect in person, which is quite rare for me because I mostly do online business at the moment, or at the moment. So anyway, I had this client that I was going to meet in person, and I was compelled to wear a top that I hadn't worn in probably 2 years. So it's like, I have to put this top on. I don't know why. So I did, even though I wasn't, particularly inspired by the top in person. I went to the meeting. We were meeting in a cafe, and literally the client had a notebook that was exactly the color of my top, even the pattern and everything. And for her, it was meaningful because it was a sign that I was the right person for her. So it can work in so many different ways if you allow for this sort of irrational inspiration to come in, because intuition will not give you the full picture. It will give you an idea, but it won't guarantee that it's working, and it won't tell you why it's going to work or how or anything like that. So it's harder for lawyers to access their intuition because they have to give up the explanation. Why should I be doing this? You just have to do it and see what happens. It's a bit like an experiment. It is also a lot of fun.
Oh, do you know, I'm sitting here thinking, I'm searching for the question here, so I'm just going to go with it. But I completely agree with you. And when I'm sort of working with my lawyers who are either self-employed or thinking about it, and we're talking about how they need to work on their brand and their profile and their reputation, because that's how they're going to attract clients and that sort of thing. Yeah. I often get the ones who are, I'm not so keen about social media. Yeah, I know LinkedIn's great, but I don't really use it because I don't know what to write about. And I might write a post and it'll take me half an hour or an hour, and then I don't like it, so I delete it. And what I'm always trying to persuade them is just write it and post it. And I think I don't give them that explanation that you just gave there, because I don't think I've necessarily linked the two. But I think that's where I'm coming from, is what you're called in that moment to talk about and to post because you've seen it, or you've just been to an event, or you've just had a conversation with a client about it. That's what you need to talk about. Is that the sort of thing you're saying?
Yes. And because I've been teaching intuition for a very long time, intuition can also come from outside sources. So it can be a conversation you overhear. It can be a post you see on social media. And it's almost like your eyes will be attracted to it, or you will have that moment where you take stock and you think, that speaks to me. I don't know why, but it does. That can be your own intuition showing you that that's the path to follow. So it's important so this is why most people who teach about intuition talk about meditation. I disagree. When my tagline is, you can, hone your intuition without having to wear crystals, meditate for hours, or give up coffee or wine, because I think that's ridiculous. But there's
many of my audience will be very pleased to hear that.
Exactly. But at the same time, it requires you to pay attention, to slow down a little bit, and maybe even notice patterns. And I guess intuition and patterns is the thing that most people have heard of because of Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, which talks about a certain type of intuition, which is pattern recognition. I go much further than that, but I can take people from there to, more. And intuition is really like a muscle. It's something that you exercise, and you usually have it in hindsight. Maybe you decide to go to a party after work and you really didn't want to go, but suddenly you feel this impulse to do it. And there you actually meet someone who introduces you to your next client. Right? Yes. So it's that kind of thing. It's really, really important. And you wouldn't necessarily associate lawyers and impulsivity. No, is it impulsivity or impulse? Impulse, or the quality of being impulsive. But it's actually, it's very useful to get the next opportunity. Yes. If that makes sense. Or you could be drawn to go to a certain conference and it doesn't quite make sense. Now, I'm going to tell you an anecdote actually about lawyers, because I now want to work with lawyers and support them, because I can see I've gone full circle from being a lawyer to being an entrepreneur to coming back to the legal world. And I feel that I have a lot to bring to the table. But initially, when I had this idea of working with lawyers, it didn't make sense at all. And I sort of parked it. But then the very first PR opportunity that I had after that idea popped in was actually an article that was published with Medium, Authority magazine, on my top 5 tips to be the top lawyer in your field. Now, at the time, I didn't even think I was going to work with lawyers at some point. So it didn't make sense for me to apply for that particular article. But now that I'm over a year into it, and I have now had my 5th article with Authority magazine is about to be published, they all make sense. Because I've had the key given to me. It was actually after I wrote the article that I was shown that I was supposed to work with lawyers. Literally, probably 6 months after that. But I had to take the first step. I had to follow my first impulse and trust that the dots would connect afterwards, in the famous words of Steve Jobs. Intuition will ask you to have, faith is a big word, but at least to trust your impulses and trust the ideas that come to you and have the courage to act on them, because very often it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yes, it does. It does. And that, again, I see with lawyers, we are to make a huge generalization, we are generally a risk-averse bunch, or at least we're trained to look for the problems. We're trained to look for the risks, just as you said at the beginning of the episode. So there are three key pieces of advice that I've picked up from what you've said, Ange, that I think would be useful. So I'm going to suggest these three key pieces of advice, and correct me if I'm wrong, or feel free to add any, that might be useful to our lawyerpreneur audience. So the first one is to make space. And I completely agree with this. Make space for the ideas and the creativity to come in. So that is actually, it's a business tool I use. I meditate in the morning, and every so often I do journaling as well, as business tools. And I encourage my clients, when it works for them, to do it. So make space for the ideas. I that is something I would always suggest to people. The other one is be open to opportunities. So just as you said there, you might feel tired, and you might feel, I don't know if I want to, go into town and go to that event. But if you feel called to go to that event or to get involved in it, who knows what sort of client or contact you might be able to meet there. And I think that the other point, the big point I've picked up that I agree with so much, is in terms of people's raising their profile, whether it's articles they might write, whether it's posts on LinkedIn, etc., is to try to learn to go with their gut instinct or their intuition. And I know it's a journey. At first you don't trust it, and at first you perhaps don't even hear it, but to listen for it, and to be brave enough to go there and to write that post, to write that blog post, to write that article, because it's not about the reach. It doesn't matter how many people see it or like it or comment on it. It only needs to take one client to see it.
Absolutely. And I want to say something, because I'm pitching at the moment lots of different legal podcasts, because I'm really excited about coming back into the legal community after being 15 years in the wild. And
you're coming home.
I was watching the Suits, the TV series, and it took only 16 minutes of the first pilot episode for a managing partner to tell Jessica, a retiring managing partner to tell Jessica that he had decided on something with his gut instinct. Only 16 minutes, intuition cropped up. And I know Suit is not the legal world, but I found it really, really interesting, because gut instinct is something that everybody talks about at one stage or another, especially entrepreneurs. But what they don't know is how to access it. It's almost like it comes or it doesn't. I really don't know how to do it. Whereas I've spent and dedicated the past 15 years of my life as how to access their intuition, because I feel that every profession, lawyers and others, who can access their intuition are going to be functioning at an amazing level compared to their peers. First, because they're going to have brilliant ideas. Also, because it enables you to do things in a fraction of the time that you don't normally do. Whether it's the content, whether it's, research or anything, you can literally find, and I find that also with the internet, and this is going to sound really, really weird, but when you're really tuned to your intuition, when you do a Google search, you hit on the most amazing ideas that pop up and that are perfect for what you need. And I think there's a bit of magic there, maybe in the words that you use, maybe in the timing, maybe in all these different little things. But for me, it opens the door to a huge potential of success. But what I say is success on your terms, because I know what it's like to be a successful lawyer, 15 years, thriving career. The crown of my career was the IPO of Orange on the stock exchange in London and Paris. It was amazing, but it wasn't on my terms. I was burnt out. I couldn't look after my children. I worked incredible hours. But now I know that thanks to this particular skill that can be acquired, more like honed, we all have intuition, but can be learned, we are accessing opportunities and fun things as well. The fun element of it is incredible. And I'm really passionate to bring the fun back into law, because why not? Right?
Yes, and yes, because that's what I was also thinking about while you were going there, and you didn't make a big point of it, but you mentioned it. It's about the success with more ease. And that's, I couldn't agree with you more. I was 3 or 4 years into my legal business when I first started working for myself, and chronic stress, nearly burnt out, didn't know if I could do it anymore. Down the line, I've got 2 businesses and work less hours, earn lots more money, enjoy it far more, spend time with wonderful people and get to do things like this. And if I hadn't opened up to listen and to learn and to follow what I needed to do, it still frightens me sometimes that what if I didn't have this life? What if I didn't do this? So I'm like you, really passionate about trying to help other lawyers find that way too.
Yeah. And I will say one thing, it's not for everyone, because I had to unpick the belief that hard work is the only way.
Oh, yes. Oh,
and that,
yes.
And that still catches me.
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes I have to put the effort into something because I think if I don't, then I don't really deserve the success. But I catch myself much quicker.
And that could be a whole other episode. I'm traditionally from a farming family, and my farmer grandfather only took 1 day off in his life. Even on his wedding day, he worked in the morning. He died 80 years old after he'd come in off his tractor and sat down in the kitchen and said he had a headache, and then he went. So I come from a family with the strongest possible work ethic. It's still, as you say, it catches me. When I notice it is a problem is when I'll often listen to YouTube videos on sort of 1.25 or 1.5 speed so that I can actually listen to them more quickly. It's when I realize I want to do that with my meditation.
Oh, that is so funny.
This is a half an hour meditation. Shall I try and get it done in 20 minutes? I'm like, what are you doing?
And you know actually it's a Tibetan or Zen proverb that says if you don't have time to meditate for 1 hour, you need to meditate for 2 hours. Because you need to catch that mindset.
Yes. Oh, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And Ange, I have one final question for you, because mainly I'm really interested in it, and your take on it is, a few years ago, I didn't talk to lawyers about anything particularly spiritual. I kept away from it. I wasn't sure how it would be received or what they would then think about me, etc. I do think things have changed and are changing, and you very much introduced yourself as the spiritual lawyer. And I know you've got a new podcast coming called The Spiritual Lawyer that we will make sure everybody has access to, etc. How do you feel about that now? I mean, you're talking about it now, so you obviously feel that it's ready to be talked about. Do you feel lawyers are ready to have more spiritual conversations? I do. And the proof has come from me talking to another lawyer in the States who was doing, one of those CPD training for a local law society. Now, I have no idea where it was, Washington somewhere. And it was initially going to be about well-being, and they had 1,500 lawyers signed up, and all they talked about was spirituality. That conversation happened last summer, and it completely blew my mind. But in a way, I totally understand it, because I feel ready myself as well. Mm-hmm. And I feel that if people, because people misunderstand what spirituality is. Mm-hmm. They think it's meditation. They think it's reciting mantra. They think it's being, not swearing, never being angry, and, and giving up coffee and wine. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah. For me, spirituality is about presence, and it's about kindness. And it's also about having a feeling that there's something bigger than us at stake, and a bit of magic, out there waiting for you. And I've experienced all of that. I have actually some stories that I'm going to share in the second memoir I'm going to write, probably later on this year, about how I went from being a lawyer to being a spiritual mentor. Mm. And the things that have happened to me have completely blown my mind. And I know not everybody will be ready to hear the lessons or the stories, but at least if they can hear one or two, and it moves the needle a little bit and then a little bit, and then, do you know what I mean? Like that whole thing of reincarnation that led me to train in clinical hypnotherapy after I left the legal world. I don't even know why I was so fascinated by reincarnation, but I remember saying to my sister when we were 15 years old and we were fighting, well, I was 15, she's 3 years older than me. And I said to her, look, we have chosen each other. Let's just get on with it.
And at the moment these words came out of my mouth, I was like, where is this coming from? I was raised a Catholic. You know, this is the anti-reincarnation religion, if there is one. But but I kept looking, and funny enough, just I know we're close to the end of this interview, but on one of the I used to take part in privatization of telecom operators all around the world, and we went to Thailand, and I was sat at a table with the team and ministries. You know, there was the Ministry of Telecom, the Ministry of this, that, and there was a minister sitting next to me. I was very intimidated. The guy, for the whole time we were sat next to each other, talked to me about how he would go on a retreat twice a year, a silent retreat. And I was like, oh my God, this man is bringing so much wisdom into what he's doing, because he has this practice and this mindfulness and this presence. And I honestly left the table feeling almost transformed by just being next to him.
Yeah.
And I feel if we can bring that presence to everything that we do, we can affect change in ways, because lawyers are powerful people. They are actors of change, right? They do that through their clients, but also through the law and everything that they do. So if we can bring some wisdom into the business world by embracing our spirituality, and I think for me, spirituality and religion are completely different things.
Yeah.
I actually hardly ever talk about God. This is not the topic. But for me, you know, if you bring more kindness to what you do, I remember for me when I was a lawyer, towards the end of my career, I was into knowledge management. So my whole job was to bring lawyers together, to get on together. And there was actually a big divide between the English and the French lawyers, because it was a big organization. And I was fascinated. And it was something, I love the human aspect of it, and the unity. You know, I thrived to show people how much they had in common, even though they thought they had so much not in common. Sorry, that's not very good English. And if we can come from this space, I think we can look at things in a very different way. There's also the whole movement of nonviolent communication, which I think is beautiful for conflict resolution. All these things we can bring in, and we can make a difference.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the point you made about sort of bringing people together. And I know when I've put groups of lawyers together before, as I've done over the last few years, whether it's networking, whether it's the self-employed community, because it can be lonely working on your own. I've found that myself, and actually having the support of other people together is really important. But yeah, there's a magic to a group. And I've always said that, just bringing people together to support each other, and even the ideas and the sharing that comes out of that. I believe there is a magic there. I do. Yeah. Bringing people together.
And if nothing else, it gives you a sense of purpose, and it brings a sort of quiet happiness. You know, you can let go of the restlessness when you have these practices, or when it's a word that I like to use, and I don't know if that's going to resonate with your audience, but being aligned, where you feel everything is aligned. Your values are aligned with how you do things, and how you present in the world, and the kind of work that you do. It can do so much for your well-being as well. It's like it's an expansion that comes from within, but that radiates into everything that you do and everyone that you meet. And sometimes you can actually make an impact without even saying a word when you're in that sort of space.
Yes. And that is something that I'm noticing far more the last year or so. So I'm having conversations with lawyers who say my values don't really fit with where I am at the moment. I need to change something. And I think they wouldn't always use the word aligned, but it comes up when we're talking about it, because you're right. When we feel out of kilter and something's not right, we're not doing our best work. We're struggling. Our well-being is suffering. And especially if we are entrepreneurs and it's our own business, then the business suffers, because we are the business. So to be able to bring all that into alignment, which is what that's the work I do with them, and it's the work you do, no doubt, as well, helps with all of that. And I know we could go on for hours and hours and hours. So perhaps you're going to have to come back, and I would love to hear our audience thoughts on this topic, because I know it's different to anything that we've covered before. But you know what, I think the legal community is ready to go there and talk about more spiritual things, and I think a lot of people will get a lot out of this episode. So I think we'll have another topic.
Intuition is super important when you explore your spirituality, because there is so there is so much. It's a jungle out there. That's not what I like to say. And so in order to navigate the waters of spirituality, you have to have that radar internally that says to you, this doesn't feel right. I am not doing it. I don't even have to justify it. This feels right. I'm going to do it. Yeah. That's what's right for me. And that is the core. I didn't, until about a few months ago, actually, when I decided to embrace spirituality in addition to the big intuition piece that I'm working with at the moment. But intuition is like the compass that now allows you to navigate your spirituality in safe waters. Because even traditional religions have a little bit of a taste of cultism in it. You know, if you think, that there's, I mean, if I come from being Catholic, there was so much that made me feel uncomfortable as a child in the Catholic, tradition. And I even stood up and said to my dad, no, I don't want to do my confirmation. I don't feel comfortable with this. And luckily he honored my request. But that's very important. The intuition piece is super important.
It is. Well, I would love to be able to point people to where they can find out more about your work. You've already given us a teaser for your next book, so people should look out for that. And I will make sure that they've got links in the show notes to your podcast as and when it's ready, and connect with you.
There's an existing podcast, which is called The Intuitive Revolution in Business, where I talk all things intuition, 88 episodes. And I will be launching The Spiritual Lawyer as a separate podcast, but it's probably going to be around June, July. So the best thing to do is to go onto my website, which is theintuitiverevolution.co.uk, or spiritualityforlawyers.com. And then just take it from there. There's a shop, there's a list of all my podcast episodes, there's a couple of blog episodes, and lots to have fun with, really. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ange. And I really hope our listeners enjoy this episode.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Just in case you've missed it, don't forget my book, The Authentic Lawyer, is now available on Amazon, whether on Kindle or hard copy. Do get hold of a copy for yourself or for any lawyers that you know. It has been written for the whole of the legal profession, and I'm hearing from people who are aspiring lawyers through to legal business owners, through even to people who provide services to lawyers and to law firms, just how useful it is for them. So do get hold of a copy for yourself. And if you have got a copy and you've been reading it, I would be extremely grateful if you could pop over to Amazon and leave a review for me. Good, bad, whatever it is. The reviews just help other people to see whether the book is going to be useful for them or not. And so I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.